From the Xfinity Studios at WVON. We're your original social media. The Talk of Chicago. 1690 WVON.
You are listening to, you are watching, you are witnessing the Buchanan and Seaton show. So joining us is going to be someone that we are extremely honored to have with us today. Joining us from the Inner City Muslim Action Network is Rami Nashashibi. He is the executive director of the Inner City Muslim Action Network, IMAN. He is a MacArthur Genius Grant Fellow and a 2018 Opus Prize laureate. He received a PhD in sociology from the University of Chicago and has taught courses at multiple universities since, including a teaching appointment at the Chicago Theological Seminary. He was also appointed by President Barack Obama to the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Joining us right now is Mr. Rami Nashashibi. I would like to actually call him Doctor, if that's okay.
How are you doing, my brother?
Excellent. How are you, sir?
Good.
I feel like I didn't pronounce all the syllables in your last name.
You got close, though.
I got close.
Is it Nashashibi?
Feel free to go ahead and correct me.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Nashashibi.
Whoever said it like a native. You got it right, Nashashibi.
Okay.
Thank you, Doctor. So we appreciate you being here tonight.
That's right.
On this Friday night. So we recognize that this is definitely, more of an atypical situation, especially for the depth of conversation that we're probably looking to have. So we thank you for taking time in your evening to be with us.
Thank you for having the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, I've been able to read and get updated on your organization, and I must say, it looks like you guys are just doing phenomenal work. And again, we opened the show by saying, there's so many times that Chicago is just used as a scapegoat to talk about many of the negative things that happen here. But there are people on the ground that are looking and working to make things better. Your organization being part of that, and we wanted to bring some people on to tell the good people of Chicago the kind of work that's being done, the type of goals that are being achieved, and then how they can help support. So if you could go ahead and give us a little background about your organization and let people know exactly what you guys do.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me on.
Sure.
IMAN, which is the acronym for Inner City Muslim Action Network, we've been around now since 1997 is when we incorporated. And the core of our mission is this idea of being an organization that's working for health, wellness, and healing in the inner city. And we do that holistically in a way that, addresses all aspects of life in our community. So we think about, for instance, we run a holistic community health center that just actually 2 days ago was finally designated as a formal federally qualified health center, an FQHC, and have been doing that for a number of years. We have a whole set of reentry programs. We've been working our brothers who've been coming home after long prison sentences. This is a part of our population that's been critical to this organization since the beginning, and we've had a reentry program now for a number of years called Green Reentry that provides not only job training, housing, but a holistic set of kind of reentry services, including access to behavioral health, lots of arts programming, and community organizing training, so that our brothers are coming home as leaders who are trying to change the very conditions that in many cases were in part greatly responsible for the inevitable incarceration of so many in our community. And so we think about that alongside of our arts work, which is a big part of what IMAN does. We have a big arts and culture department. We put on huge festivals over the last 20 years called Taking It to the Streets is one of them in Marquette Park. We helped lead the effort to build the first memorial to Martin Luther King and the Chicago Freedom Movement in Marquette Park. And, lastly, we have an organizing arm, which is have been really in great part responsible with working with, churches, Latino organizations, Black and brown parts of our communities across the Chicagoland area that get major legislation passed both downstate and in City Hall. And, that kind of all of those four distinct efforts, again, are part of a very holistic approach. We don't just do one. We don't allow our health center just to exist in isolation of our green reentry work. Our green reentry work is connected to arts programming, and we feel like that type of holistic approach has produced tremendous outcomes in our communities. And we, although are headquartered in Marquette Park, we work across Inglewood. We have a number of different efforts across the city. We have a full-time also chapter outside of the state in Atlanta that's been going now for 4 years.
Excellent. It sounds like, it doesn't sound like you guys are obviously doing very remarkable work and very comprehensive work. I can't imagine how, again, it's just amazing to me to hear how well thought out and planned everything that you guys are doing is and laid out. So with that said, I'd like to kind of dig in a little bit, if you don't mind, into the four areas you talked about. So area one, where you talk about, your website talks about primary behavioral and oral health care, ORAL, oral health care through its community health center. If you could explain that one a little bit. Are you literally, are you guys fixing folks' teeth, or what does that mean when you say oral?
Yeah, no, oral health is just kind of, another way of trying to get access to dentists, especially to do basic dentistry, which is, part and parcel of such, critical health. And is also, as we know, in so many Black and brown communities in a place like Chicago, one of the many types of access to health services that are often very difficult to get. So we provide that alongside basic primary care, which is just your general, physician checkup. And a critical thing that has grown tremendously over the years is our behavior health, i.e. mental health. And we know that there are not only, throughout the last several years, mental health clinics throughout the city were shut down, and our communities are often not only suffering from, PTSD because of the violence, because of lack of access, but, in Black and brown communities, whether they're immigrants, whether they're Latinos, whether African Americans, or folks from different backgrounds, especially in communities where there's a stigma sometimes associated with getting mental health. IMAN provides it in a way that tries to remove that and does so creatively. So we'll do art therapy. We'll have you come in and see the primary care physician, and you then get an opportunity to what we do is called a soft handoff. The behavioral health specialist comes in and you talk through some of the issues. Some of the brothers that may be residents in our programming come, and part of their regular check-in is they talk to the behavioral health specialist and the primary care folks. So it's an integrated approach, and our health center now runs 6 days a week, and, it's growing and it's expanding. We see patients from literally over 25 zip codes. Still a very modest facility. We're growing on the size of our facilities, but what impresses me is whenever I step in and see our patients, I've run into brothers who are riding their bikes all the way from Oak Park, passing huge other medical facilities to come and see doctors with us. And I think a lot of that is due to the type of medical care we provide. We at any given time, you'll have Spanish, Arabic, English in our center, and you feel like you're sitting in the living room, not in a really clinical, cold, sometimes detached hospital waiting room.
Doctor, I'm just blown away by what I'm hearing when you talk about the cohesiveness of it. I'm literally, you're painting a very beautiful picture as I'm seeing all these different ethnicities and different languages and different backgrounds and different cultures all coming together for a common purpose and a common good. And that is very much a microcosm of what much of Chicago is like. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation. So let me ask you this, as you eloquently explain that. If you could talk about, because you mentioned this, the effects of PTSD when you look at violence in urban areas. And I think we talk a lot about the numbers. It's hot outside. There were 72 people shot, or there were 16 people killed. And we talk a lot about that. But we very rarely talk about the aftermath of that violence. And it sounds like your organization is doing something to help that. If you could talk about the importance of that for a moment.
Yeah, and I've been involved in some form of, either violence prevention work or, that aspect of our programming has been a critical part of who we are almost for 20 plus years. And I've seen all different iterations of it in the city. I have to say this, that one thing that excites me the most about our current moment in the city, and this is something you will not get on the 30-second soundbite, is there's more attention, alliances that have emerged. One of the entities, Communities Partnering for Peace, otherwise known CP4P initiative, that was spearheaded by the Metropolitan Family Services, one of the oldest service providers in the state of Illinois. In fact, the oldest service provider, who's connected a number of organizations. We're building a field of outreach workers, violence prevention workers that really has built on the best practices. And I think beginning to demonstrate that our collective efforts across the city are making a difference. I think the problem when you think about violence in the city of Chicago, and you don't get a chance to see the fact that on the ground, I could take you down the blocks that we've worked with over a number of years and take you down blocks that were once the epicenter of violence. And you walk down those blocks now, after we've taken vacant, vandalized homes and turned them into re-entry homes, and where brothers have actually, the same guys who were caught up in the violence are now the very guys who are helping to repair the community and taking ownership of the community and living in those homes, purchasing those homes, because they're finally given an opportunity to say, I have a stake in this city. And that's what's so often overlooked when we talk about violence. Over the last 20, 30 years, we have created conditions in urban neighborhoods on the south and west sides particularly, but this is not unique to Chicago, but of course we feel the pain acutely here, where we have really failed generations of particularly black and brown men, and within that context, even more intensely African-American communities, by not giving these young, particularly men, opportunities outside the criminal justice system. And when you do that, and you just leave an entire generation to fend for itself, you're going to see the circumstances that we unfortunately have seen in the last number of years in terms of violence. And I think now more than ever, there is a coalescence, a coming together of organizations, of more political officials, people who really get it, both in the public and private sector. And we're coming together in ways that you don't always see on the evening news. And I think CP4P is just one of several very important initiatives that gives me a lot of hope. And I've been, again, around a long time and have unfortunately been to way too many funerals. But in light of what I see and what I've been privileged to be a part of, I'm very hopeful, as are a lot of the activists, I think, working alongside me at this moment.
Chicago, if we want to hear from you. The call-in number is 312-374-8130. That number again, 312-374-8130. Dr. Nashashibi, this is David, and again, I'm listening to everything that you're saying, and I'm really trying to drill down. And I love that you're getting so specific. My question is that we oftentimes do a really good job at diagnosing what the issues are in our community. We can point to the violence. We can point to mental health or lack of access to mental health or nutrition or any of the things, homelessness, any of the things that you've kind of touched on. What has your research and your working in this field helped you identify some causes? It sounds like you're doing a really good job of addressing, the effect of what we see, but are you identifying, or have you had any success in identifying the causes so we can prevent the next generation of individuals who fall into these traps as you've outlined them?
Yeah, and I think the research, honestly, and I'm a person that appreciates research, comes out of, premier academic institution that studied these issues, I'd say to death, quite frankly, pun not intended. But I think there is a issue, quite frankly, that sometimes we're having to be addressed in the city, which is sometimes our intense levels of research have not always led to the most practical interventions for the communities that need them the most. I think most Chicagoans, quite frankly, know where the pain is. They don't need another intensive study to tell them that. And I think most people, quite frankly, know what really the solution is as well. And the reality is, I think we just, and we're at a point right now where we just have to all summon up the courage, the long-term vision. It's not going to come overnight. I mean, look, when you take what I've seen over the last, we had 70 guys a month ago that were all trying to sign up. At any given moment, our Green Reentry program, without a word of advertising, has 180 guys on a waiting list. And we have a young cohort, 18 to 25-year-olds, who are partnered with, folks who are coming home from long periods, prison sentences. And we see in them a desire, a urge. I mean, they've been on our waiting list. Unfortunately, we've had people who've been shot and killed while they've stayed on our waiting list, who are looking for an opportunity. And we've seen the same guys who would have been caught up in the cycle of violence. When you give them opportunities, when you give them training, when you give them access to school and colleges, we've seen them thrive, and we've seen their life trajectory change. And when you get the right number of those guys who come from a concentrated set of blocks, then you begin to see a quality of life on those blocks begin to change. The challenge is that work is not going to be easy. It's going to have to be long-term. It's not just a matter of a numbers game. Although we all want to see the number of violent, shootings down in the city, we have to change our paradigm and understand that we have to do what they did post-World War II in Germany, is rebuild our devastated urban economies. And that means investing not only tremendous amount of resources, but a tremendous amount of time and attention and energy to rebuild the institutions. When you go down certain streets in Inglewood and you go down certain streets on the west side and you see that there's nothing open in the evening, on the weekends.
Dr. Nashashibi, we're about to have a hard break. Can you hold? We're going to just hold you over to the after the commercial, because we want to have you come back and finish that. That's a powerful thought. You're listening to the Buchanan and Seaton Show. We'll be right back on WVON.
Talk radio that makes you think. You're listening to the Talk of Chicago and the voice of the nation. 1690 WVON. The Talk of Chicago. 1690 WVON.
The whole world looking at me, watching and waiting to see if I fulfill my destiny. The whole world looking at me, watching and waiting to see if I fulfill my destiny. The whole world looking
You are listening to the Buchanan and Seaton Show on WVON. We are having a fascinating conversation with Dr. Rami Nashashibi of the Inner City Muslim Action Network. And is that pronounced IMAN?
IMAN, yep.
IMAN, okay. All right, thank you. For those of you who want to join this conversation, 312-374-8130. That number again, 312-374-8130. I wanted to follow up on, and I know you got interrupted, so I want to give you the opportunity to finish your thought, but I wanted to touch on something. I heard you when you said in your original, when you were kind of talking about your organization in the beginning, and what stuck out to me is you mentioned the phrase inevitable incarceration. And as I've been listening to you talk about the target group of individuals that your organization is trying to lift up and trying to help, you keep talking about that seems to be a recurring theme, talking about helping individuals who are being released from prison and helping them to get reacclimated into life and finding employment and finding their purpose and everything like that. But that takes me back to my original question before the break, that we seem to have identified the effect. We know what to do when we have a group of people who are being disproportionately or wrongfully incarcerated, and how we can rehabilitate those individuals. What is your suggestion, or what's your solution to keep those individuals or this part of the population from being incarcerated in the first place?
I mean, that's a great question, and I think that lies at the heart of what we're talking about, which is, again, there are volumes of studies that reinforce the same lesson, which is, again, very commonsensical. The more touch points you have, the more engaged opportunities that you have in communities that have been devastated or abandoned or criminally disinvested from, the more opportunities we have to be preventative, the more opportunities we have to sustain a meaningful opportunity outside the cycle of incarceration and violence. I mean, it's really that simple. And I think if anyone who's been involved in this work for any period of time can tell you, and you can see this flourishing in places across the country where it's worked, with Jeffrey Canada in Harlem, with Kenny Gamble in South Philly, models across the country that have demonstrated you're able to create ecosystems that provide young people with opportunities that are sustained, not just for one period, but sustained opportunities, and you will see preventative long-term solutions.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, and I just I want to push on that a little bit, because when we're having, I think that this conversation is too powerful, and you're too powerful of a guest for us to just be, to just have a surface kind of conversation.
No, absolutely.
So again, I want to push on that a little bit. Socioeconomic disenfranchisement or being socioeconomically depressed is not unique to the African American experience. There are plenty of devastated communities throughout the United States that have been, economically divested. Whether you're talking about areas that used to be, powerful centers of industry for steel, or for the automotive, industry, or for even, the coal industry. We could, I've traveled around this country, and there are some devastated areas of this country that used to be thriving, that are majority non-African American or non-people of color, but we don't necessarily see the same types of issues that we see in our community. Is there something specific about our community that makes us more susceptible to the outcomes that you're talking about? Because it has to be bigger than socioeconomics.
No, absolutely. I mean, you cannot disentangle the effects. And this is not just a theoretical academic argument. The consequences of race and racial segregation and the consequences of white supremacy that we still live with are very, very real. Look, my family is my mother is a Palestinian refugee who came here to the south side of Chicago after May of 1948. And I see, even with the devastation that she experienced, as a refugee, being among 700,000 other Palestinians who lost their home at that time, coming and, struggling with all the circumstances, they still came to America post-19, and they were one of the first Arab American families to move to the South Side. They still had, in all of their extraordinary tragedies, they still had intact what so many of the other communities who were, particularly in black communities, experiencing, never had an opportunity to get out of, that is, they did not come to this country being the prime target of a campaign, quite frankly, of terror that has imposed itself on cities like Chicago in very real ways. Look, just a couple months ago, we commemorated the 1919 100-year anniversary reign of terror. In that moment, and I commend Mayor Lightfoot for lifting up that historical moment, because that history, as Brian Stevenson has tried to demonstrate, the history of lynching, the history of the Great Migration into these cities, and the terror that accompanied it, redlining, restricted covenants. That history matters, and that history has consequences. If you think about what happened in 1919, for instance, you had over 1,000 homeowners, black homeowners, who had their homes decimated by mobs, and that were roving across the Bronzeville and the South Side areas where black families were trying to move into. And at that early moment, some of the first formation of black street organizations were beginning to emerge to defend themselves from the mobs that were making life absolutely unbearable. And
we're talking about sundown towns.
We're talking about we're not just talking about sundown towns. We're talking about neighborhoods. Those sundown town realities throughout the state were very real. But we're talking about neighborhoods in the city of Chicago that you know better than most. Neighborhoods like the ones that we're organizing in right now, Marquette Park, that for a long time, if you were not white, you were not right in. And those neighborhoods became the places that working class white folks fled to at a certain moment, because they were convinced that proximity to blackness would result in absolute utter devastation of any economic gain that they had as working Lithuanians, Irish, and Polish folks. That sensibility, and I'm getting to this point because it's real, that sensibility, the racialization, the racial terror that really in many ways led to our modern urban realities need to be taken very seriously. The flight that it precipitated, the disinvestment that it precipitated, the ways in which young black men were policed. I asked the 70 young men that were in my orientation the other day, all of whom were African American, for them to raise their hand if their first encounter with the police happened at 10 or before that age. And 85% of them raised their hands. And many of them talked about being put in squad cars in neighborhoods that they felt that were just being policed all day long. And so if you're 10 or 9 years old, and you begin to think that your only encounter, with authority is through being put in cars and being thrown up against cars, you begin to lose hope very quickly in any possible reality other than what you see in front of you on the streets. That reality, unlike the type of economic devastation you may see across the country in other ethnic neighborhoods, is in part and parcel of a racial narrative that still America is still coming to terms with, that is not just about the South. It's about our urban neighborhoods across places like Chicago. But I'm still hopeful in the face of that. The more that we confront that, the more we come together, the more communities, black and brown communities, come together. And this is not just pointing my finger at any particular, white ethnic community. Look, my family, like I said, is Palestinian, Arab communities. Many Arab owners occupy and own corner stores and liquor stores on the in black neighborhoods on the west and south side. We confront that reality as well, because our people also became part of a narrative that was about exploitation and oppression, and that narrative is impossible to understand just purely on economic terms alone. You have to understand the long-term implications of race in America.
Okay. This is Atiba, and thank you for that eloquent explanation. You definitely gave us a lot to chew on there. As I hear you say that, a couple of things you said comes back to mind. Earlier, you talked about recidivism, and you talked about the new perspective of men coming out of jail and now being given a different opportunity. And I think you summed it up as them feeling like they have an investment now in the community. And as I hear you break down just the pathology of what happens to someone when they're 10 years old and they meet law enforcement that way, and they very quickly begin to become someone that doesn't feel like they're a part of the community. I've heard a phrase in my life, and it says, the most dangerous person is someone who has absolutely nothing to lose. And I think that's what happens with a lot of these young men, is that they feel like they don't have anything to lose, and they certainly don't feel like they have anything to gain. But it sounds like your organization is helping giving them a renewed sense of perspective, and that perspective is a thing that helps them get on not just get on the straight and narrow, but stay on the straight and narrow. Is that about right?
Absolutely. And not only, and I think we have to also just change slightly the kind of emphasis there. It's not just that our organization is trying to give them a new perspective. These young men are demanding an opportunity to have this perspective. These guys who are coming home from 25, 30, 15 years, they want that opportunity, and they are actively seeking it out. I think that's one of the greatest myths, quite frankly, and it's one that I feel like I get the honor of seeing it dismembered every day. But I would love for the rest of folks in Chicago and other places and other individuals and families that don't get a chance to see this stuff on the ground, that there are men every day that they bring themselves through extraordinary circumstances. I've seen guys in our program, just yesterday we had the graduation at Kennedy King. We had one young man whose father was shot and killed while he was in this program. He was being pulled back into the street, but instead he doubled down. He not only completed our 5-day weekly program on Memorial Day, he started what we called the Green Reentry Weekend Warriors, which in addition to the 5 days meant you were going to give up your weekends completely by enrolling into a program that we partnered with the city colleges, where they got 9 city college credits. They got a welding certificate. You got admission into the college degree program. So for literally from Memorial Day weekend to Labor Day weekend, this young man was giving 7 days a week, never missed one day, was working around the clock. Now, that's not this typical image you have of a young black man on the south side of Chicago wrestling with the issues of violence. And all we had to do, we didn't have to really try to convince him of that. All we had to do was put that opportunity on the table, because people like Tariq, brothers like him are out there and they're actively looking for something that looks like a real opportunity. The reality is, and I think this is where we all have to feel accountable, we have failed our communities in providing people who are looking for real opportunities with things that can be sustainable and long-term. And I think that's what gives me the most hope right now is the realization that unless we all come together through entities like CP, 4P, Chicago Cred, a number of different alliances across the city, and not only provide them for 1 year or 2 years, but look, how can we do this as an institutional effort for the next 2 decades? I think that type of vision is going to be what's responsible for seeing a really significant turnaround in the city and hopefully serve as a model for folks across the country.
Wow. Dr. Nashashibi, do you mind taking a call real quick? We've got a Terry on line, too. Go ahead. Thank you for calling, Terry. What's your question or comment?
We've got Terry on line, too. Terry, go ahead and with your question or your comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me, and I want to thank your guest for all that he's offering the community. And I've listened to the entire conversation and, just thinking about the narrative, and I'm just going to simplify it because, instead of, I know we don't want to have a surface conversation, but some of it is, more simplified, just changing the narrative. Like, I appreciate the programs, but I think when we have our gentlemen, our Black African-American young men being released from jail, they already have this mentality of defeat. Like, what are we doing to change that narrative? Are we feeding them? Because we can tell them one thing, but, it's about teaching them and showing them, and I agree, we have failed them. I think we do have to start simple for them, and that is not saying they can't understand something more, but it started simple for them, and it's what's being fed to them. Like, mental health is real, and if something happens in the African-American community, it's because we're thugs, but if it's happening in another community, it's because of mental health. And so
no, that's a great point.
In mental health.
No, I was just saying that's a great point, and that's what you kind of touched on what I was asking Dr. Nashashibi earlier, that a lot of the things that we're talking about, I think sometimes we get so myopic and we try to pretend like these issues only exist in our community.
Right.
The issues of poverty, the issues of mental health, the issues of access, socioeconomics, those are not specific to just Black and brown people, but we do see different outcomes from those variables in our community. I'm sorry, Terry, go ahead with your thought.
No, that's exactly right, and we're not investing into their mental health. It's kind of like you can give someone $1 million, but if they've not been taught how to invest it, how to properly use it, then what are they going to do with it? So, we have to start at the beginning, because some of this is a root cause of generational curses, not to go super, super deep, but it's some things that have been fed to them. And so not only by someone that they trusted and loved, but now by others who are feeding that, and they see this, and we know, a lot of it is systemic. So we have to be the change. We have failed them. I agree. I'd had this whole wrestling, mental conversation with myself today about that, just things that I witnessed today. And so this conversation is definitely needed, but I think we definitely have to dive deeper. And so I definitely appreciate your guests and all that they're doing, but I definitely think, because right now I'm writing up a proposal for Mayor Lightfoot so that we can have a mental health conversation and not just continue to talk at people, but let them know we're invested in you. And these are some of the things that we're willing to do if you work with us. And you have to show them, like you have to definitely be an example and not take away. It reminds me of Nipsey. A lot of people, Nipsey Hussle talked about him being in the neighborhood, but he was trying to show them how to get out. He just wanted to stay there. That might be a little off, in another lane. But just thinking about everything that's happening right now, there's a solution, but I think that we're not diving deep enough.
Well, thank you for that call, Terry. We appreciate that, Dr. Nashashibi. That was a lot. I think we kind of touched a couple of different things. What do you want to follow up there?
No. Thank you, Terry, for that. And I fully agree. I mean, we've seen just on the basic point, like I said, keeping it very simple. At any given time, we have months sometimes of waiting lists just to get in to see a behavioral health specialist at our small, community health center. And the reality is that a lot of the issues in our communities, like you said, they're not unique. In some ways, the types of poverty, violence certainly exist in many parts of the country. The reality is here that it's criminalized more intensely in poor Black and brown communities, and we need look no further than the war on drugs to exemplify that. Or even the national narrative. I mean, a guy goes up and shoots and kills Latinos at the border, and the president of the United States again is talking about mental health. If it were a Latino, a Muslim, or Black, either you start talking about criminality, terrorism, and all these other things. And we see that on a day in, day out level. But I think the hope and my prayer is that we're beginning to hear, I think, with the new administration in Springfield, with this mayor and with a number of other kind of coalitions, how critical it is to double down on mental health services, how critical it is to create alternative spaces that mentorship is real and sustained, because that's also part of the problem, that there's not a lot of sustained mentorship. So as a young man, if I'm struggling with what I'm seeing in my family or on the streets, there's not a lot of places I can go and find, community centers that can really serve me and give me the needs that I need in a comprehensive way to give me a way out. And that takes a tremendous amount of investment. So we really do have to recognize the scale of the challenges before us so that we can get people to invest at the level that is needed. And, there's the good news is there's lots of great efforts that are out there. And I think I encourage your listeners to go to some of the websites like Communities Partnering for Peace, find out ways from a number of the organizations that are working, how to get involved, how to get engaged, what Brian Stevenson talked about, getting proximate. And I couldn't agree more. The more proximate you are to these types of day in, day out kind of opportunities, the more hopeful I think you begin to realize that these solutions actually can and do work. We just need to do more of it, and we need to do it in a way that's sustainable. As we come to the end of the hour, Dr. Nashashibi, there's something I'd like to ask you about that I can't let you leave without asking. And I just, if you don't mind, just kind of giving us your thoughts on the whole. Well, one, let me ask you this. Has the NFL or Jay-Z's Rock Nation reached out to your organization to give you guys some money? And two, what if you could just kind of give us your thoughts on the whole thing, especially specifically as it pertained to the organization that cut the young man's hair? I'm sure you're probably well aware of that. Cut the young man's dreadlocks. And if you could just kind of give us your thoughts on Jay-Z's partnership with the NFL, and then subsequently the money that has been doled out to the types of organizations that they figured out, because again, that organization is out of Chicago, ironically enough. Yeah. I'll be honest, beyond the tweet that I saw, I didn't really get into the intense details on that. I mean, and no, the simple answer is no. We have not heard from Hope or the Rock Nation or Jay's or the NFL yet. And not that I give up on that possibility. I mean, people, Common and Mos Def and Lupe and other artists from Chicago have, Chance have been doing phenomenal things. And I think we have to give our artists sometimes a break. They're working on, 500 levels, and sometimes they're seeing things, and, they're in many different conversations, and they're trying to sometimes think about, different aspects of this. There's no excuse for an organization like the one that I heard about. And, the idea is just yet another denigration of our communities in such a, paternalistic way of dealing with the issues. And we do need to fight this, a great white hope, a great brown hope. I don't care who, what color the hope is, but if you come with this condescending, patronizing interventions like the only problem is his hair or the dress or, the way the dude talks or something like that, that type of analysis needs to be confronted for what it is. It's part of the paternalistic, racist sensibility of our communities that got us into this problem. And then they want to turn around and suggest the reason why we're not thriving, our communities are not thriving, is because of, the way, the brothers' pants are too low or something like that. And I'm not trying to dismiss those things. We address accountability the way you present and all that. But, to start there, to start with appearance, and especially with the issue of hair, of course, we know how, the history of that when it comes to white supremacy and racism. So there's no excuse, of course, for an organization like that. I want to maybe give someone in the NFL the benefit of the doubt that it slipped under the radar and you didn't know about this, and that Jay-Z didn't know about it. I would hope that he had no idea, and if he knew about it, he would certainly confront it. So I'm hoping to hear from the brother soon.
As I think all of us hope that you hear from him soon. It sounds like that you would be a great organization to part with. We're getting to the end of the hour, so I have to ask you one more question. I'm usually the contrarian when we have these types of conversations. I often get mislabeled or labeled as someone leaning to the right. But I've heard you've done a very excellent job in the last hour identifying the problems. Like I said, talking about white supremacy and talking about lack of opportunity and the things that your organization is doing to help people out of the hole that they find themselves in, whether we're talking about being released from prison or talking about trying to help people in our community find jobs, so forth and so on. And I think all of those are great and laudable. My question is, and this is oftentimes where Atiba and I kind of part ways, my question is, where is the responsibility that we identify in our communities to be preventative? We do a really good job of being reactive. We do a really good job of saying, hey, we've got a disproportionate high number of people from our community in jail. What are we going to do when they get out? We do a good job of saying we've got a disproportionate number of our kids dropping out of high school. What are we going to provide for them when they drop out of high school and they can't get a job? What are we? And I'm just using those as just 2 points, because I don't want this to get too broad, but. Right. What are we doing? What is our responsibility? Where do we take responsibility in our community to be proactive as opposed to reactive? And we've got about 2 minutes. If you can just give us that answer, and that would be great.
Sure. I mean, two things very quickly. One, I think, you go to, we have a full-time chapter in Atlanta, and you go to West End of Atlanta, and you see extraordinary, thriving middle-class, upper-middle-class black communities. You see thriving communities of color. And when you see that, what you see is people who have actual ownership. They've invested. They've created pathways for people to feel like we talked about in the early part of this conversation. I own this home. I own this block. I helped build those houses. I'm going to take a type of opportunity to be able to see myself in the future of the city. The more opportunities we create, I think that's the most preventative, intervention that we can forge forward with that has long-term effects. But the issue is it's going to take a commitment now to be able to then see that result sometime in the near future, and we will see it. The more opportunities we provide, the more results we will see. Secondly, I would simply say, listen, we also, from a spiritual perspective, there is a verse that we draw from in the Holy Quran, and I'm sure we find these traditions, whether it's the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, wherever you want to look at it. But there's a verse that says, God, the Creator, will not change the condition of a people until they struggle to change what's within themselves. There's also a spiritual alignment as a community that we all have to struggle to also be very conscious of the types of lives that we are aspiring to live. It's not just about what's happening on the outside. It also is very much about our internal alignment, expecting more from ourselves and one another, and lifting the stakes for a much greater future. I believe collectively when we do that, we will see the results both in the short and long term.
Dr. Rami Nashashibi, we so appreciate you joining us on a Friday night. Like I said, we're at the end of the hour. This is Dr. Rami Nashashibi from the Inner City Muslim Action Network. If you want to just tell people listening really quickly how they can find your organization, if they want to donate, if they want to follow you, if they want to participate, how can they find you?
Right. Inner City Muslim Action Network. It's IMAN, IMAN Central.org on our website. We're on Twitter. Certainly follow us there, and also be connected to some of the larger efforts in the city, like the Communities Partnering for Peace, CP4P. And look forward to hearing from your listeners and staying engaged with all of you at WVON. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
We appreciate you.
You're listening to the Buchanan and Seaton Show on WVON. We'll be right back.